Hey Samantha. Hey David.
Hey David,
Hey Samantha.
it's not how we normally talk to each other.
We bought a boat. Alright, well it looks like we bought a boat anyway. So in the last video we got you up to the decision making behind why we made an offer on the boat that we did. And so now of course that then leads us into, alright, we're getting this boat checked out, going to survey and seeing if it is actually as described in the ad. So, Samantha, the first thing we need to do, of course, before taking it to survey is actually discuss, I guess, the contract. So what was the go with the contract?
Yeah, so I just did a Google search and found a marine solicitor, and he actually ended up being local in Newcastle. Lovely guy, and he received the contract from the boat owners of the boat that we were looking at buying, and he had quite a fair few changes that he wanted to make. The contract went back and forward a couple of times.
So the reason we had to get the contract in place before we took it to surveying, or to a survey, was because the owners, of course, were outlaying money. They had to check that the boat was, of course, running suitably, so it had to have a bottom clean or a bottom scrape before it went. They had to hire a captain. They had to obviously make sure that the engines were topped up with fuel and everything, because the location where it was going to get hauled out was actually a 4-hour motor from where the boat is currently, or where the boat is currently stored. So that's an 8-hour round trip. So it's just not moving in the marina or moving down the stream a little bit. It's a significant move where the boat's going to be running for 8 hours. So the owners had to put a fair bit of outlay into it. So they obviously wanted to make sure that if we were just to frivolously pull out or whatever, that that there would be something in the contract that would say that they would be reimbursed for the costs that they have spent, or to actually just take it to survey. Anyway, so we had a contract organised, and that was a big rush to get that contract organised because, of course, the sellers wanted to get the survey done as soon as possible because they had other people that wanted to look at the boat as well. So the survey was a bit difficult because, as I said, the place where it could get hauled out was 8 hours away, and it needed to be done at high tide. Now, of course, that means that because it's going to be a 4-hour drive to get there, they're going to have to leave, the captain is going to have to leave, and the surveyor are going to have to leave early in the morning. So we really need the high tide to be in the middle of the day. So by the time we arranged a high tide in the middle of the day, and then we arranged the captain to be available on that day, and then we had to find a suitable surveyor to be available on that day, it ended up being, of course, about 2 weeks later from the point where we actually agreed on a price to where we actually got to take the boat to survey. But that 2 weeks...
All the ducks in a row.
Yeah, that's it, to get all the ducks in a row.
Yeah.
That survey, that 2 weeks did give us 2 weeks to get the contracts sorted out before we actually did take it to survey. So what was, so the surveyor got back to us, Samantha, what did they say?
Obviously we spoke to the surveyor while we were in Newcastle at home, and he was on the boat, and it wasn't, unfortunately, great news. It was a little bit of a downer to sort of hear his overall report, but Dave and I sort of discussed obviously the issues that he reported, and the condition not being fantastic, but it had been a family boat, and we figured we're moving our family onto it with 2 kids as well.
Yeah, so I think some of the words probably that he used, I guess, that were most worrying was that it looks like a below average ex-charter boat. Now obviously the sellers had made it out, as they do. They look at their boat with rose-coloured glasses, and they made it out, and of course that's what you do in ads, is you make it out to look as good as possible. And I guess the surveyor sort of brought us a little bit back to reality in terms of, look, it's not, and of course the price indicated that it's not a top-notch model.
And granted, the owners had kind of abandoned, I guess, left the boat back in February, March or something.
Yeah, when COVID was hitting, they just they left the boat quite abruptly, and we sort of had to weigh up that, all right, to take a boat to survey, I guess ends up costing several $1,000s. So it was about $2,000 for the conveyancer to look at the contract, or to arrange a contract. We had to pay for the surveyor, of course, which with the oil checks for the engine ended up being, I think, about $1,300.
A bit more, I think.
So we had to pay for the haul out. So yeah, it's several $1,000s that it costs to take a boat to survey. So we sort of had to weigh up, saying, well, look, if we lose several thousand on this, if we did that 3 times, then we've lost 10 to 15 grand, which then
Yeah.
actually it means that we could no longer really afford the Lagoon 400s, and that we'd be looking at obviously a different or a smaller type of boat. So yeah, it was almost like, all right, well, let's take the leap and say,
Yeah.
we'll have to take a little bit of the opinion of the surveyor and say, look, be prepared that it's not in the best condition,
Yeah.
but also take a little bit of faith in the owners, saying that it's got all the systems that we need to live aboard,
Yeah.
which of course puts it a step above the charter boats where we don't have to fit it out or spend the
And
time fitting it
they've
out.
serviced all of those systems, Sailor. So
Campbell, don't make the camera move too much, buddy.
just
Don't lean.
Just don't. So yeah, we've done quite a few house renovations before, so we weren't afraid of picking up some tools. We weren't afraid of a bit of mould and pulling a few things apart and working out how they work. And of course, we'd done a bit of work on the Trailer Sailor Melody Maker over the last couple of years.
And the good news about the surveyor, I guess, is that, yeah, right, well, you spend, as I said, about $1,300 doing the surveyor, but his report, I guess, then enables you to try and negotiate on the price a little bit more. So you do kind of get that money back from spending on a surveyor, because that allows you that gives you a good justification point to reduce the price of the vessel that you negotiated. The vendors were nice enough to agree to our requests for some money off the price, and so that then moves us forward to say, okay, yep, well, that's it. We have actually agreed. And the thing that shocked me next was because the surveying, now you should, if you're getting a surveyor, you should actually allow that surveyor a good week and a half to actually do the report. So the surveyor he went there on the day, of course, and travelled all the way to the haul out and all the way back. But then he went back the next day because he said it was too rough or something to look in the engine bays.
Get the oil for the sample.
Yeah, to send the oils for the samples and get the oil samples back, for him to actually write the report up. Yeah, I definitely have to allow a good week, which is possibly, and it was good that Sam actually did this in the contract.
Yeah, so I negotiated the dates a little bit. The dates were really tight between, I can't remember what they were called now. It was like a settlement date, but then there was a prior date to that, which was basically the agreement date. And we had to make a final agreement, and nothing was to change after this particular date. And it only gave us about like 3 or 4 days, which wasn't enough to get the report back from the surveyor, to discuss everything with each other, to negotiate with the vendors. And yeah, so I went back to my solicitor and said, look, can we do something about the date? We're okay with the settlement date, but we just wanted a little bit more room in that agreement phase.
Yeah, so definitely when you're looking at your contract to buy a boat, definitely allow, I would say, at least 2 weeks as a minimum after the surveying date for you to be able to make your final decision as to whether you're going to go ahead with the purchase.
Yeah.
Because that's when you put your 10% deposit down. So
Yeah.
yeah, a bit of advice there. All right, so we agreed on a price with the vendors, and that's it. That was we put the 10% deposit down, and so that's it. We're tied in, we're locked in now. There was no...
Yeah, we bought a boat.
We bought a boat, so yeah.
A Lagoon 400 in
That's
America.
it. Yeah, that's it, in America.
Yeah.
And that was the difficulty of this whole process, is that we never actually got to look at the boat firsthand.
Yeah, especially with COVID. It's not like we could just jump on a plane and, or Dave could jump on a plane and come to the States and...
Yeah, obviously the ideal situation to buy a boat is to basically be able to travel to where you're looking, the boats you're looking at, go and have a look at them, and then go home and think about it.
Yeah.
Or look at several boats. But of course, we're in Australia, even if COVID wasn't occurring, for us to fly over, look at a boat, fly back home again,
Another
again,
$5,000.
you're talking 5 grand, 10 grand
Yeah.
there to go and do that exercise. And if you've got to go and do that exercise a couple of times, I don't know whether it's really feasible. So COVID or not, we were probably always just going to rely upon a surveyor's comments to describe the condition of the boat. Once we have agreed on the price, we've put the deposit down, we obviously need to organise insurance before we settle for the boat. Now here's the really the interesting thing, or this is again curveball number 361 of buying a boat overseas. So we were going to go through the same insurer that the previous owners had had, and the previous owners had hurricane insurance for the boat in South Carolina. So it was mid-October, or early October, sorry, when the contract was due to settle.
So still in hurricane season.
Still in hurricane season, which runs through to the end of November. The insurer said to us, okay, well that's great, yes, we can insure you, but you're not going to be covered for a hurricane. Even though it's the same boat, same location, same insurer, they said our policies have now changed and we no longer insure boats in South Carolina in hurricane season. So our options were to obviously lose our deposit and not buy the boat. An option was to hire a captain to sail the boat 3 or 4 days continuously north to get it into the hurricane zone.
Or out of the hurricane zone.
Out of the hurricane zone, sorry. Or the other option was to basically effectively self-insure it. So insure it for everything else. If it sank on the dock, if it got run into by another boat, it'd be covered. But if a hurricane came along and it was damaged, then we wouldn't be covered for basically the rest of October and November. And so that's the option we took. The owners were gracious enough to delay settlement, I think, for a week and a half.
Yep.
So that
So we're
basically
covered
got us
for another
to, yeah, that covered us for another week or so until the middle of October. And then we just basically had 6 weeks there of fingernail biting to crossing our fingers to hope that a hurricane didn't come along, which fortunately it didn't look like it come along. All right, what's the next thing?
So the other thing was health insurance. So we looked at a few different options. Obviously, not a lot of Australian travel insurers were giving or selling insurance policies. So I looked to World Nomads, which is part of NIB, and we were able to get worldwide insurance through World Nomads, which covered basically everything except anything related to COVID. So we talked about the risks, obviously, and we figured that, you know, we were, I guess, in the lower risk of getting
suffering, I guess, the effects of COVID.
Yeah.
There are obviously, it is a serious disease,
Yeah,
and we need to be wary of it.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
at the same time, you know, it's a pretty low percentage of people that are seriously affected from it in our age group.
Yeah.
And obviously the kids don't, you know, it's very even more unlikely that kids would suffer serious ill effects from it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so now it's a matter of packing up the house and finding flights and making sure we can leave the country. We ended up looking at the Delta Airlines in the States, especially for the internal flights, mainly because they were still only one of the airlines in America that were only filling to half capacity, so they weren't chocking their planes full with passengers like American Airlines.
So there was a lot of talk in Australia about, oh my God, it's going to cost you $10,000 to fly overseas. Now, what, again, a lot of people don't actually appreciate about the situation, it cost you $10,000 to fly back into Australia because the airlines had limited numbers of who they could bring back in, so they were filling up first class and business class first. But if you wanted to fly back out of Australia, it was really only just regular prices.
Yeah.
We possibly paid a little bit more because when we wanted to leave was so close to Thanksgiving, but the prices to leave Australia they weren't significantly different from what they usually would be. All right, so the things we sold, of course, so we had to basically rent our house out. So we engaged a property management firm to lease that out for us. We had to pack all the house up. We moved a whole bunch of the stuff into the stuff that we're going to keep. We had a 3-car garage, so we blocked off one of the garages and we chucked as much stuff as possible into that garage. We sold our cars. We sold the kids' motorbikes. We sold the trailer sailor. We sold Sam's stand-up paddleboard. We sold my push bike. We sold, basically, you know, if it wasn't bolted down, it was getting sold.
We gave away some furniture. We sold some furniture.
We then basically spent, I had a week where we all moved into my father's house, so thank you Dad and Pam for that. And then we had a week when I left, and then Sam went and stayed at her parents for a week.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a great idea. highly recommend that if you're making a big move like this, to try and move out of your house a week or 2 weeks before you actually leave, because it just meant that there was a deadline before the deadline. So
Yeah.
I had to fly out on this day, but the actual day for moving out of the house was like a week or two earlier, and we ended up using several days up to me flying out to still clean the house and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and I highly recommend finishing work a week or two before you go. I don't recommend working right up until the last day before you go, like I did, because my brain was smashed, and I was pretty exhausted before I even left Australia. So
all right, well, hopefully that video brings you up to speed on the whole boat buying process and our organisation in terms of ready to head overseas. Join us on the next video where I guess I'm going to set flight, where I'm going to take flight and head over to America.
If you like the video, please like and subscribe.